Hey, if you were into 80s hard rock and heavy metal, this video is for you. You know, we do these flip throughs every once in a while on these heavy metal hard rock magazines, and I'd never owned a Rip magazine before. I knew about them, I'd seen them, but I've never owned one. And those of you that watched, we did a video a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was a week ago, where we opened up a box that we'd ordered that just had a whole bunch of these magazines in there. And this was one of them. And I said in there, hey, what's the first magazine you want us to go through? And several people said, let's do the Rip magazine. So here we are. We're going to flip through this thing. And like I said, I mainly had Circus magazine. That was the one I always read when I was a kid. But we've, on this channel, gone through some Hit Paraders. I think this is our first Rip. And then we actually have some Metal Edge that came in, and we're going to be going through all these things. But anyway, this one's from February of 1988. February of 1988. And so here we have Rip magazine on the cover. We've got Anthrax on the warpath. Of course, we have David Coverdale, cool skateboard photos. Now and forever, 96 pages of full color Metal Mania stoked. Does that mean these were always 96 pages long? I don't know. I don't know enough about it. Dee Snider and Armored Saint. Okay. Oh, and here's the question. Whitesnake's David Coverdale, shaghead or just plain sweet guy? All right, let's jump in here and see what we got. Okay. First page, we have Dokken back for the attack. It's so interesting looking at the progression of Dokken visually, because, you know, just a few albums before this, probably my favorite one, it was Tooth and Nail. And I just love that album front to back. And then when you got to the next one, Under Lock and Key, they started looking a little more, I don't even know how to put it, hairspray-ish or something. And then they even transitioned a little more here where he's wearing just kind of interesting watching how they adjusted, how they changed over the years. I always loved Dokken though. I thought they were so cool. I've talked about it on this channel before. I actually went and saw them back in, I think it was 2011. Of course, George Lynch wasn't there with them. Neither was Jeff Pilson. It was just these two that were still from the original group. But anyway, I always I thought they had some really, really great stuff. And so here we have, that's got to be David Coverdale there. And then what do we have? Great White's Big Bite, Motorhead Gets Serious, Helix, Heaven Can Wait, The Donington Report, Dee Snider, Metal Muppet. Let's Get Intimate, David, Rush, Holding On to the Fire. Okay, this will be fun. All right, so going in here. All right, back issues. There's Alice Cooper. There's Bruce Dickinson, and then Yngwie Malmsteen, and then my eyes are not good enough to tell who that is. That's Ozzy, obviously. There's Rob Halford, Kiss, Steve Tyler. That looks like Don Dokken, I think. God, I'm just not really sure. My eyes. I think that's got to be Metallica there. So anyway, that's Rip. You order back issues of Rip magazine. Faster Pussycat, I got to be honest with you, I know very, very little about Faster Pussycat. I just remember them. But I think I've heard one or two songs over the years, but it wasn't like I ever got into them. And if there's a great song or a great album we should have and talk about on this channel, put it in the notes. Comment. Let us know what those things are that we need to do. So then we have Alice Cooper. And then let's see here. Road Racer Rules. King Diamond. Merciful Fate. Cat? Worship Me? Never heard of Cat. If anybody knows about that, tell me. Gangrene, don't know that one. Paradox, Infinite Majesty. I don't know any of those right there. Of course, King Diamond. Okay, and then Sammy Hagar, Rip teaser. Sammy Hagar, Grr. Wonder what this is all about. Sammy Hagar. Oh, what is that? Just one picture of Sammy Hagar just for the fun of it in the middle of a magazine? I guess so. Great White. I tell you, that song Rock Me was just so good. And I think that in some ways kind of carried him because that was on Once Bitten. And I bought that album, and I didn't love the rest of the album, but they just kind of had this cool bluesy sound to them. But Rock Me was such a cool, sweet little baby, don't have to go. And then, so Jack Russell's a singer, and then Mark Kendall is the guitarist, and they were kind of the main guys in the group. And I saw them in the 90s, after grunge had taken over the world, and I saw them with LA Guns and Rat and Poison and Great White, all these bands that were so huge in the 80s. And I saw them it must have been 95, 96, somewhere in there, in this place that didn't even hold 2,000 people. And you had all four of those bands playing together. It was so wild seeing something like that. But they were good. And this was long before the big fire thing that happened. I mean, that was unreal when that happened. If you remember that. Anyway, they were a good band, and then they put the next album out, which was, so they had Once Bitten, and then the next album was just called Twice Shy, and I think that's the one that had the song Once Bitten, Twice Shy on it, which of course isn't their song, yet it became one of their hits. But they were a cool band. They had some good music. I didn't go crazy for them, but they had some cool stuff. There's of course Jack Russell. There's the band again. He always had Mark Kendall always had those sunglasses on every time you'd see him. Okay, here we go. 12 heavy hitters for penny. How many of you, we've talked about this before, how many of you did this? Where you'd send in the penny and then you'd take these little, you'd write down whatever the number was for the thing, and then you put it over here in this little slip, and you'd mail it in. And it was, the first time I remember seeing this, I thought, that can't be real. And then I did it, and I got them. And then ended up, all you had to do was buy a couple more records. And anyway, I got some, some cool stuff from it. Permanent Vacation. We just put a video out not long ago on Permanent Vacation on this channel. We've also done one on Girls, Girls, Girls on this channel. There's Metallica, Bruce Springsteen, Cars, Loverboy, Poison, and of course Whitesnake. And then, that's true. Oh, it's from the side. That's why I couldn't tell. That's Dream Evil from Dio. So yeah, that was so, I don't know. I'm just curious how many of you did this. Heavy up on heavy metal, and then they feature Bruce Springsteen in the Cars. Okay, here's Great White again. Okay, this is pretty interesting. So when we did that unboxing, whatever it was, a week or so back, we had, one of the things we pulled out of that box was just this single page, and it had Warlock. It had just this image of, and I didn't know anything about him other than I had seen her before, and I'm trying to remember her name now, because I'd seen things about her, and people right now are screaming at the screen. Doro Pesch, that's it. I'd seen pictures of her, and I knew that she was the singer for this band called Warlock, but I knew nothing about them. And somebody commented and told me what song to look up, and it's hope I get this right. It's Paula Webster. Anyway, I'd put it down in the notes and said, you need to go listen to the song I Rule the Ruins. So I did. And it's actually pretty cool. It was actually a really good tune. So anyway, Warlock. There's Warlock right there. Triumph and Agony. And then Gestures of Destiny. I know nothing about Gestures of Destiny. Don't know. If you know anything about them, down in the notes. Zoetrope, same thing. Don't know anything. Down in the notes if you know anything about them. Dokken, of course. I was a big fan of Dokken. I know of Sacred Reich, and I think I've heard some music, but I never owned anything. And so if there's, again, a great track to go find, put that down in the notes too. What would be a good thing to listen to? And there's Sacred Reich right there. I love pictures. I love pictures like this, because it looks like it'd be it could be a bunch of dudes just hanging out from my high school, and there they are, in this like big metal magazine being sent around. Anyway, I love that stuff. It's so cool. Anyway, there's Sacred Reich. Good song. What's the track to go listen to? Because I know very little about them. So, and then Gene Loves Jezebel. I don't know if I should be embarrassed that I know this, but I know I actually love Gene Loves Jezebel. And House of Dolls, I literally have this album in the collection. I mean, I am mostly loved, I was so into heavy metal and hard, but I had this part of me that really loved a lot of that kind of, everything from U2 to INXS to even some Depeche Mode. There was so many different things I loved back then. And Gene loves Jezebel. So if you're actually just at all curious about this band, the House of Dolls, that's not the album to listen to, in my opinion. The album to listen to from these guys is an album called Discover. Now, the whole album's not good. There are 2 good songs on that album. And one of them is called Heartache. And it's a little bit of a whiny, I don't know. But the other one is called Desire. So if you're curious about Gene Loves Jezebel, if you've never listened to them before, it was an album called Discover, and it's a song called Desire. And it's actually pretty cool. I used to really, really love Gene Loves Jezebel. I had a couple of their albums, but that was the one that I thought was really good. Because I had a buddy. I bet a lot of you had this same kind of thing. I was kind of a metalhead kid, and I had this friend of mine that was really into punk rock, but he also kind of got into the British new wave stuff. And so we were really good friends. And so he would be over listening to Iron Maiden with me, and he loved Accept, the real fast stuff. And then he'd pop on the stuff he was listening to, like Skinny Puppy, and I can't remember some of the others, but I mean, this was one of them. Gene Loves Jezebel was one. And there was a bunch of bands like that we would listen to together. And so we just kind of had this overlapping interest in a lot of different groups. And that's how I ended up getting into some of this other stuff, because I had some of these friends that were into these other things. And so I just kind of found myself putting my feelers out and listening. And anyway, so my record collection is so crazy because it has so many different things in it. But Gene Loves Jezebel just happens to be one of those bands where I've got a few of their albums. Okay, Heavy Metal Fashions. And it's funny that they're in this, because this is like supposed to be a metal magazine, right? They were not heavy metal. You couldn't even mistake them for it. Not even close. Anyway, just strange. Heavy Metal Fashions. A lot of Iron Maiden in here. White Lion. Hey. Yeah, look at all this. There's Malmsteen, Anthrax, Tesla. Is that Tesla? That's hard to read, actually. Yeah, it is Tesla. Okay. Rat, of course. We did a video on Rat just recently, and man, I couldn't believe how many people commented and responded to that. If you haven't watched it, it was a video on their EP, and I found some cool stuff about it. And if you haven't watched it and you like Rat, you should go find that video. I think we put it out really not that long ago. Okay, Motorhead, Get Serious. This was an interesting time for Motorhead because they had been, a 3-piece band. And they had Fast Eddie Clarke, and they had Phil Taylor was the drummer, and then of course Fast Eddie. They had just had some turnover happen. Fast Eddie went off and started Fastway, as you know, and so anyway, things got a little bit weird for Motorhead here, and so anyway, and matter of fact, there's Phil Taylor right there. So, and there's Lemmy, of course, playing his bass. He was such an interesting character. So Meat Puppets, I'll be honest, I knew so little about Meat Puppets. I just remember I'd hear about them now and again. I think I saw Chris Cornell once talking about how much he liked the Meat Puppets, but I never did much. I should, but I don't know much about them. If there's one of these albums that we should have here in the collection, or a song we need to listen to, please put it down in the notes, because we're always looking for new things and interesting things we need to have in our collection. And this is something, sadly, I know very little about, other than they influenced Chris Cornell, who I happen to be a huge fan of. Okay, Fresh Blood. David Chastain. I don't know. I'll be honest with you, I don't know anything about this. If anybody knows something we need to be looking up, then let us know in the notes. Whiplash. Again, I don't know. It must have been, again, kind of a lesser-known band. White Lace, that looks so 80s. That is as 80s as you get. Look at that. That is amazing. I don't know anything about White Lace. If I should know about White Lace, tell me. I'd love to know. Okay, this is going to make me sad. So you remember what I said a minute ago about Gene Loves Jezebel? Lions and Ghosts. I absolutely loved these guys. There were 2 albums, and I don't remember. I think this guy is a guy named Rick Parker. Like I said, I got into some other kind of new wavy, different alternative music back then. They had an album that was called Velvet Kiss, Lick of the Lime. And the first 3 songs on that album are just awesome, in my opinion. And now you may hate them, but if you like the style of music that they're just absolutely fantastic. I listened to them over and over and over. I became such a big fan of these people. And I rarely found any people, there it is right there, Velvet Kiss, Lick of the Lime, Tiger Beat Centerfolds, Rick Parker, there it is. I don't know any of the rest of these guys in the band. But they had such cool music. Oh my gosh, I loved especially the first 3 songs on their first album. And then they put out another album called Wild Garden, which I didn't like as much, but if you don't like that style of music, go listen to the song Wild Garden by Lions and Ghosts, because it's a little different. It's a little more rock and roll-ish, but it still has kind of a, I don't know how to put it. It would fit in the category of Echo and the Bunnymen and U2 and The Alarm kind of stuff. And so anyway, but I really liked him. And Wild Garden is a cool tune. Lizzy Borden. What an interesting, that was an interesting group to say the least. Helix, Heaven Can Wait. So Helix, I tried to like Helix. I bought a few of their albums, and I think this guy's last name is Volmer. Don't ask me why I remember that, but because I think he was the singer, if I remember that correctly. Okay, what if Helix vocalist Brian Volmer suddenly found himself, and I'm pretty sure that's him. And the reason I am pretty sure, is just out of curiosity. I actually follow him he's got a Facebook account, and I kind of watch what he does. And I wanted to like Helix. Like I said, I bought a couple albums, but I just never, I don't know. It just never resonated with me. But I tried. Here's Motorhead. This is the album that was out at the time called Rock and Roll. Had the song Eat the Rich, which is a cool tune. It was pretty good. Okay, now we have to flip the magazine here to look at it a little differently. So what do we have? Okay, so Bananarama. This is so interesting to me. Why is Bananarama in a heavy metal magazine? Then, of course, here's Rob Halford in his mullet phase when he was, because that is hair, right? Because he did kind of grow his hair out in the back. I remember that. And then here's that band we were talking about earlier, Sacred Reich. I should know more about them, clearly, because they've been mentioned a few times in here. So then there's Udo Dirk Snyder. You cannot miss Udo. So obvious when he's around. And I love Udo Dirk Snyder. Just there's something about him, just that short, stocky German dude with that just enormous, gravelly, growly, screamy voice. I've talked about this on this channel before, the album Restless and Wild, how I was walking home from school one day, and there was this guy, and this is what life was like back then, you know? There was this guy, and I just passed him when we were walking home from school, and I don't remember how we even started talking. Maybe he had something written on one of his notebooks or something, because you could always tell if you saw somebody had a shirt on of something that you could communicate with them. You know, if they had like a band shirt and you knew who they were, you could have a conversation with them. Well, it was something like that. And the next thing you know, he's like, dude, you need to come to my house. He says, are you familiar with Accept? And I don't remember because I'd heard of them or something. He goes, you got to come to my house. You got to hear this. Because we were talking about heavy metal or something. And so we go over to his house and we walk into his room, and he has a big poster of plastic surgery disasters. If you remember the album cover. And so I knew, I'm like, okay, this guy is going to be into some pretty intense stuff. And he busted out Restless and Wild by Accept. And if you've never listened to Accept's album, Restless and Wild, get on it. It was, I was whatever I was, 13, 14 years old, walking home from school. And this was such a cool thing back then because there was no, here, put these earbuds in and listen while we're walking home from school. It was like you go to their house. And then you could go through all their records and you'd sit there and talk about their records and you'd look at them and you'd get to know a person that way. And I went over to this guy's house and he busts out Restless and Wild by Accept and he puts it on. And you've heard, if you know the song, it starts out with that little German folk song, hi dee, hi do, hi da. And then you go, what is this? And you hear the crackling of the album. That's actually on the recording, the crackling. And then all of a sudden you hear the needle grind across the record and you hear Udo Dirkschneider just the most blood-curdling scream and then just this unbelievable like heavy metal thing, the most craziest thing you've ever heard. And you're going, what is this? And it was just, and so it just blew me away. It was so cool. So then anyway, needless to say, by the next day, I had Restless and Wild. I had the album. And the first side of that album is just nonstop awesome. It just is. And I think I like the second side too, but I just remember I played that first side over and over and over again. And if you're not familiar with Accept and you want to just listen to something great, get Restless and Wild and listen to the first side, especially the first song, which is called Fast as a Shark. It'll peel the paint off your wall. It's so good. And so anyway, but it's fun. It's interesting because we do miss out on that social part of music. Kids do today. That it was such a great thing because again, you just go hang out at somebody's house. I had a guy that I'd ride home on the bus with him. And he would sit and talk about the Dixie Dregs. And so we went over to his house a couple of times. We just sat and listened to Dixie Dregs records. And I don't know, it was just cool because I'm introduced to Steve Morrison. Rod Morgenstein, I think was the name of the drummer. And you were just introduced to music in a really interesting way. And then you'd flip through the records and you just put an album side on. You just sit and talk and listen to the music. And it was such a cool experience. Because we had a different relationship with it back then because of it. Anyway, that just got me thinking about that. But that was my real introduction to Accept, was at some dude's house, walking home from school. All right, so the Ramones, Vince Neil. Here we go. Steven Tyler conjured up the tune Dude Looks Like a Lady after hanging out one night with Vince Neil. That's great. We actually just recently put out a video on this channel about the album Permanent Vacation. If you're an Aerosmith fan, you should go watch it. That's kind of funny that pops up here. So anyway, I love Aerosmith, and that's anyway. I love Motley Crue too. The Donington Report. Okay, I remember hearing about these concerts when they would happen, and this is basically like the Monsters of Rock. And so let's see here. So England's Donington Festival this year featuring Bon Jovi, Dio, Metallica, Anthrax, Wasp, and Cinderella. That would have been quite a festival. Check that out. That's unbelievable. So many people go to these things. And then here's the bands. So we have obviously Metallica here. And then we've got, okay, here's our thing. So clockwise from top left, James Hetfield, Kirk Hammett, obviously. And then we have Nico McBrain. There he is from Iron Maiden. Vinny Appice, and the Fred Curry from Cinderella. Lizzy Borden, some interesting stuff. Blackie Lawless, can't miss Blackie Lawless. Jeff LaBar, he's from Cinderella, obviously. And then this is the guys from Anthrax. Joe Belladonna, Frank Bello, Scott Ian, Dan Spitz, Charlie Benante. Dan Spitz. I would have said that was Steve Harris. Am I just missing something? Do Dan Spitz and Steve Harris look identical? I'll be honest with you, I don't know enough about. I had Attack of the Killer Bees. Somebody gave me a cassette tape of Attack of the Killer Bees. I saw Anthrax open up for, I think it was Kiss. And they were just a crazy, fun band. And I remember that the song they did that was with Public Enemy. Oh my gosh, that was cool. Anyway, they had such, it was just cool, crazy music. And it was a lot of fun. And I remember I actually saw they did that film. It wasn't a film. It was a live broadcast called The Big Four. And it was broadcast out of, I think it was in Europe somewhere. And you had to go to a theater to see it. And it was Anthrax, Slayer, Megadeth, and Metallica. And I remember, anyway, we saw that in a theater and it was really cool. But again, Anthrax was just kind of this crazy fun band. And I don't, that throws me off though, because that looks so much like Steve Harris. But they were a cool group, and I just always liked their stuff. But I don't know them, like I said, I don't know them well enough that I'd be able to say, hey, no, that's really, because I look at that and I think, boy, this looks like Steve Harris. Okay. All right, next page. Bon Jovi. And Bon Jovi, they were so big at this point. They were so huge at this point in their career. I mean, it was just amazing. It's amazing that John Bon Jovi's managed to keep himself relevant for so long. Just fascinating. Anyway, so there you go. Then here's the crowd. And then Dee Snider, Metal Muppet at Large. So if this was 88, this would have been the Love is for Suckers, because I think that would have come out like a year before this. And the only reason I would even know that is because that was kind of the album that I think kind of broke them apart. I was never a huge Twisted Sister fan, so I don't know a ton about them. But that album, Love is for Suckers, was produced by Beau Hill, who was the producer for Rat. And it gave them kind of more of an 80s hair metal kind of a personality or tone or sound. And I think that caused rifts in the group. And so if you know more about that, put it down in the notes. But that was kind of but they're still together here, but I think it kind of led to their demise not long after this. I loved Dee Snider. I thought he was just kind of this interesting character. And the first, when I really realized that was back in, it would have been sometime in the 80s, maybe even around this time, because he actually appeared on the David Letterman show. And if you ever get a chance, if you can find it, it was the funniest thing, where he's talking to David Letterman, and he's just funny. And he's talking about this thing that he had where he was like going to do a stage dive or something. And he says, yeah, and all my people, they're going to catch me. That's what he's thinking. And he says, and I jumped out, and then the sea parted and I landed on the ground. And it was just hysterical because he was kind of self-deprecating. And it was very, very funny. And anyway, so ever since I was like, yeah, I just kind of like this guy. He's just kind of a character. So anyway, this will be interesting to go back and read this article at some point, because like I said, I think this was right around the time that the band was starting to come apart. So freeze frame, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Fight Like a Brave. I had a buddy that was really, really into the Red Hot Chili Peppers back in the 80s. And it was funny because they were this kind of underground party, funky, crazy band. And he loved them. And it was just interesting because he'd play them in the car all the time, and they just had this really cool sound. So when Under the Bridge came out in, what was it, 91, that threw me off so much. Like, what is this? Because I was so used to the Red Hot Chili Peppers being this kind of funky, wild thing, because they were good players. I mean, the band was tight. And then he would kind of rap on it over the top of it. And it was it was really, really cool music. I didn't appreciate it as much at the time. But again, I remember when Under the Bridge came out, I thought, and then it's funny because they kind of shifted after that. What was it called? Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic. I think that was the name of the album. And they kind of, they did Under the Bridge, and it just introduced this new almost new sound where they were doing these, not ballads, but it was more melodic music. And like Californication, and I wish I could remember the name of some of the other songs, but they were really cool. The music was good, but it was just different. It wasn't what I had remembered from the 80s when that came in. But man, they managed, I mean, just think about that. They owned the 90s in so many ways. They were so big. And that was so interesting about it. When you listen to them back in the 80s, you would have never expected them to become this just massive, you kind of always expected they'd be kind of this underground thing. And they just got so big. It was incredible what the Red Hot Chili Peppers did. Because I think everybody knows who they are today. It's amazing how big, oh my goodness. I skipped right over Rob Halford because I see the hairspray. Look, I actually love David Coverdale. He's Whitesnake, and I love this stuff. That is some serious hairspray though. And this would have been the kind of self-titled 1987 album that had Still the Night on it, which I loved. I loved that song. And it was, in the still of the night, I feel the wolf child honey slipping around your door. I mean, it was just this classic kind of Whitesnake sound. Just so, as I recall that, even that music video was cool. Just his presence was just so awesome. And then this song also is the one that had Here I Go Again and Is This Love? And Is This Love? I don't know, man. Now they're moving into the power ballads. That's where the hairspray comes in. And then Here I Go Again, which became huge. I think that was maybe that year just the biggest song in the world. Here I go again on my own. Everybody's heard that song. And what a lot of people didn't realize is that was a redone song. I mean, they had released that song years earlier on a different album, and they resurrected it for this album, and then it just became the biggest thing in the world, which is such an interesting thing that they put this one song out, Here I Go Again, and it just didn't catch on. And they years later rework it a little bit, and all of a sudden the world's ready for it. And then you're making enough money you can afford hairspray, obviously. So anyway, they were so big. And I always loved David Coverdale. He was such a cool singer. He was a cool musician. And where we first heard of him, of course, was when he joined Deep Purple, because he was kind of a nobody, came out of nowhere. And he ended up, because Ian Gillan left, formed his own kind of solo act. And then David Coverdale gets brought in as the lead singer. And that's when we get songs like Burn, which was just one of the most amazing Deep Purple songs, of them all. And he was the singer. And then he just was, he was with Deep Purple then all the way to the end of at least that phase, all the way into Come Taste the Band. And then, of course, he's starting to go off at that point and creating this little side project called Whitesnake. And he actually pulled a couple of the Deep Purple guys in to help with it. And then it just kind of grew and morphed over the years. And I loved a lot of that Whitesnake stuff. It was so amazing. And that is a lot of hairspray. Of course, that was about right for the time. This was 88. And anyway, that's wild. Anyway, so I skipped over this, which was Rob Halford and KK and Glenn, Judas Priest, one of my favorite bands. And this was, there's the little Mullet phase that he went through there. And I don't know, I always loved Judas Priest. And what's interesting here, because I'm seeing that this is Judas Priest Live. I have that live album called Priest Live. And first of all, it could probably get the award for the most boring album cover ever. If somebody told me, yeah, this is just the temporary one, before we go to production, I'd have been like, yeah, of course, it doesn't look like, but that was the cover. And so, but I still bought it. But the other thing about it is I didn't listen to it that much. I think this was on the Turbo Tour when they recorded that. And it's interesting that I didn't listen to it too much, because when I really, really, really fell in love with Judas Priest, even though Screaming for Vengeance was kind of my first introduction to them, when I really fell in love with them, was the album Unleashed in the East, which was a live album. And the energy and the production quality on that thing was so good. And that's the first time I ever heard the song The Ripper. And so when I heard that song later on Sad Wings of Destiny, I didn't know what to do with it because it didn't sound the same. It was kind of slowed down or felt a little bit more, I don't know, dry or something, because it was a little faster in that live recording. But I tell you something, it's funny because that live recording of The Ripper made me, I discovered it later on Sad Wings of Destiny. I ended up ultimately loving that original recording even more. It somehow made me appreciate it more, that live version of it. And there were other songs like that kind of take you into the older Judas Priest period off of that Unleashed in the East, and it was just so awesome. And so, but this one, I never spent a lot of time with it. I bought it because I had to, because it was Judas Priest, and I just didn't do anything with it. So if there are any things on this live album that I should have listened to, I would love to get your feedback on it, because I don't know. I never, like I said, I never spent a lot of time with it. So let's see here. Wow, there's David Coverdale again. That's amazing. And then we have David Coverdale, and who do we have here? Vince Neil, of course, from Motley Crue. And that is an amazing picture. And so I loved Whitesnake, and I loved Motley Crue too. Motley Crue is one of those bands that I remember where I was the first time I heard them. And I think I might have even told this story before. It was when I first heard the song Livewire. I was out in the backyard with some friends playing football, throwing a Nerf football around. Somebody had a boombox and they had a cassette tape and they threw that in. And I just remember, and it just, what is this? And I just became an instant fan of Motley Crue. I just, and so after that, I got that. Of course, Shout at the Devil comes out, Theater of Pain, Girls, 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 and you're just, anyway, I just loved the stuff that they put. I just always loved them because of that introduction to them that was so amazing. I loved that music. I loved that song so much. So anyway, we'll be doing more Motley Crue videos on this channel. And if you like Motley Crue, we have videos already about Motley Crue. You can go search this channel and you'll find them. Because like I said, I was a fan of theirs. So yeah, and then there's, that I just cannot get over that. It's like Hairspray and Wind Tunnel. And then you get this, and I'm making fun of him, I know, but I love David Coverdale. I was such that Deep Purple stuff was so great, and then that Whitesnake, it was just, this stuff was so amazing. So anyway, well, we're hitting the centerfold right now. We're halfway through. We've been going long on this video, so I think what we're going to do is cut the video right there, and then we'll pick it up later. Actually, I'm just going to let you in on something. We're going to be expanding the different things we're doing on the channel here very, very soon. And different types of videos, different things we're going to be doing. We're going to have some, I'm really excited about it. And one of the things that I want to do is make a show where we explore a little bit some of those groups that didn't get a lot of notoriety, yet they did have kind of this underground following, and partly to reminisce, just because it's fun to do, and also to introduce other people. Because like I said, I had somebody comment on a couple of these videos from another video, and they pointed out stuff I'd never heard before. And I go back, I'm like, how did I miss this? And it's interesting to go to be not just reminded, but introduced to things that for some reason just went right past you back in the 80s, but other people picked up on it. And bands like TKO and Icon, these were bands that I loved back in the 80s, but they just didn't get a lot of notoriety. And what I want to do is what we're thinking about doing is having like a once a week show where we pick one of these groups and just do a little focus, a little spotlight on them, and talk about them, and look and see if I can get my hands on the records themselves so we can look at them and then talk a little bit about the record and look at the pictures and talk about the music, and then whoever's into them, give us a little bit of feedback so we can put it in the video. This would be a great opportunity if you know about some of these groups, the things that we talked about in here. That'd be a great launching point for a video about that group if we go back and read one of these things about them, and then pull out the record and talk a little bit about that group. So anyway, you saw what they were when we were going through. And the idea then is to use your feedback, your input as kind of a launching point for some of those videos. So anyway, lots to look forward to. Again, follow the channel, like the video, etc., etc. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.